She never meant to contact him. That single truth replayed in Ava Miller's mind as she stared at her laptop screen, the blue glow reflecting in her tired eyes. It was nearly midnight in her small Brooklyn apartment, the city humming outside like a restless beast that never slept. Ava was exhausted, emotionally drained, and running on cheap coffee and stubborn hope. She worked as a junior communications assistant for a mid-sized real estate firm, the kind of job where mistakes were unforgiving and apologies rarely accepted. Tonight, she had been rushing to send a confidential email to her supervisor, one that contained sensitive project updates and a personal note explaining why the deadline would be missed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her thoughts scattered. She typed the email address from memory, hit send, and leaned back in her chair with a sigh of relief, until a cold realization crept into her chest. One letter was wrong. Just one. Her heart skipped as she reopened the sent folder, dread pooling in her stomach. The email wasn't sent to her boss. It was sent to a stranger. For a moment, she considered pretending it never happened. People sent wrong emails all the time, right? The stranger would probably ignore it, delete it, maybe laugh for a second before moving on with their life. Ava tried to convince herself of that as she shut her laptop and stood by the window, watching the yellow glow of taxis crawl through the streets below. Still, unease followed her like a shadow. The email wasn't just professional, it was honest, vulnerable, and far too revealing. It spoke about pressure, fear of failure, and a quiet desperation to prove she was worth keeping around. She had never planned to let anyone outside her small circle see that side of her. Certainly not a random stranger with an unknown email address. 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Ava froze. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet apartment. Slowly, as if moving might shatter something fragile, she picked up the phone. There was a new email notification. Her breath caught when she saw the subject line, project update. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The reply was short, almost unsettling in its calm simplicity. I think this message was meant for someone else. But now that I've read it, I'm concerned. Are you safe? Ava frowned. That wasn't the response she expected. No sarcasm. No irritation. Just concern. She typed a quick apology, explaining it was a mistake and thanking him for letting her know. She added that she was fine, just stressed, and wished him a good night. She was about to put the phone down when another reply came almost instantly. Stress makes people careless, the email read. Carelessness can be dangerous, especially in this city. Something about the tone sent a chill down her spine. Who was this man? She noticed the email signature now, L. Moretti. The name meant nothing to her, but it carried weight somehow, like it belonged to someone accustomed to being listened to. Ava hesitated, then replied politely, assuring him again that everything was okay. She told herself to end the conversation there. Yet, before she could convince herself to stop, curiosity won. She asked how he knew so much about stress and danger. The reply came slower this time, as if he were choosing his words carefully. Because I've seen what happens when people ignore warning signs, he wrote. And because I don't believe in coincidences. Ava felt her pulse quicken. This was strange, but not threatening. Still, a quiet voice in her head urged caution. She searched the name online, expecting to find nothing useful. What she found instead made her stomach drop. Articles buried under vague headlines. Mentions of a powerful Italian-American businessman with deep connections. Whispers of organized crime that were never confirmed, never denied. Luca Moretti. A man the media referred to carefully, always surrounded by words like alleged and rumored. Ava's hands grew cold. She had emailed him. The man people didn't speak about openly. The one rumored to control half of the city's underground without ever getting his hands dirty. Her phone buzzed again. You looked me up, the message said. It wasn't a question. Ava's breath caught. How could he know? She felt suddenly exposed, like someone had turned on a light in a dark room. She typed back, denying it at first, then stopped. Lying felt useless. Instead, she admitted it, apologizing again, saying she never meant to bother him. She expected anger, maybe a warning. What she got instead was something far more unsettling. Most people are afraid once they know who I am, he replied. You're still here. Ava swallowed hard. She didn't know why she was still responding. Maybe it was fear, maybe curiosity, or maybe it was the strange sense that, for the first time in weeks, someone was actually paying attention. She admitted she was scared now, that she never intended to contact him and that she would understand if he wanted to end the conversation. Minutes passed with no reply. Each second felt heavier than the last. She imagined all the worst possibilities, her mind racing through scenes fueled by crime shows and late-night documentaries. Then her phone buzzed again. Relax, Luca wrote. If I wanted silence, you'd already have it. The words were calm, but their meaning was unmistakable. Ava shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. She should stop. She knew she should stop. Instead, she asked why he replied at all. The answer came after a pause long enough to make her heart ache. Because your email wasn't just a mistake, he wrote. It was honest. People rarely are. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, cutting through the night. Ava realized her life had shifted, just slightly, but enough to matter. One wrong email. One unexpected reply. She didn't know it yet, but she had stepped into the orbit of a man who didn't enter anyone's life by accident. And somewhere across the city, Luca Moretti closed his laptop, already making a decision he rarely made. I'm coming, he thought. Ava barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her phone buzzed in her imagination, phantom vibrations echoing through her nerves. Morning light crept through the thin curtains of her apartment, painting the walls in soft gray, but it did nothing to calm her racing thoughts. Luca Moretti. The name pulsed in her mind like a warning sign she couldn't ignore. She replayed the emails again and again, analyzing every word, every pause between replies. Nothing he wrote was openly threatening, yet everything carried an unspoken authority. She told herself it was ridiculous to feel this shaken over a few emails from a stranger, no matter who he was rumored to be. Still, she couldn't escape the feeling that something irreversible had begun the moment she hit send. At work, Ava tried to focus, but her concentration shattered every time her inbox refreshed. Her office buzzed with routine chaos, ringing phones, hushed conversations, keyboards clicking, but she felt detached from it all, like she was watching from behind glass. She avoided mentioning the mistake to anyone. How could she explain that she had accidentally emailed a man allegedly tied to organized crime? Instead, she buried herself in tasks, hoping distraction would dull the anxiety. It didn't. Around noon, her phone vibrated softly in her pocket. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Her heart pounded as she stepped into an empty conference room and opened the message. You didn't sleep, Luca wrote. Ava stared at the screen, stunned. She hadn't told him that. Slowly, she typed back, asking how he could possibly know. The reply came after a few minutes. People who sleep well don't reread messages at sunrise, he said. The corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. It was unsettling, but there was something almost human about his observation. She admitted she was tired and anxious, that this situation felt unreal. She expected him to brush it off. Instead, he surprised her again. Unreal things happen when lives intersect, he replied. Yours crossed mine for a reason. That sentence lingered with her long after she put the phone away. For the rest of the day, Ava felt watched, not in a physical sense, but in a way that made her more aware of herself. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and studied her own face as if seeing it through someone else's eyes. She wasn't special. She was ordinary. That was what frightened her the most. Ordinary people didn't cross paths with men like Luca Moretti without consequences. When her shift finally ended, she rushed home, half expecting something dramatic to happen on the subway platform or the crowded streets. Nothing did. The city moved on, indifferent as ever. That evening, the emails resumed. This time, Luca asked questions, not invasive ones, but careful, deliberate inquiries about her work, her goals, the life she wanted but hadn't yet reached. Ava answered cautiously at first, choosing her words like stepping stones across a river. She didn't tell him everything, but she told him enough. Enough to feel exposed. Enough to feel oddly understood. He shared little in return, offering fragments instead of full stories. He spoke about responsibility, about power being a burden disguised as privilege, about trust being the rarest currency. Ava found herself listening, really listening, in a way she hadn't with anyone in a long time. Hours passed without her noticing. Outside, the sky darkened again, the city lights flickering on one by one. Ava finally asked the question that had been burning in her chest all day. Why her? Out of all the wrong emails he could have received, why did he keep replying to hers? The pause before his response felt heavier than any silence before. When it finally came, the message was longer than the others. Because you weren't asking for anything, Luca wrote. You weren't trying to impress or manipulate. You were just trying to survive. I respect that. Ava swallowed hard. No one had ever described her like that before. Across the city, Luca Moretti sat in his penthouse office, overlooking a skyline he effectively owned without ever putting his name on it. The room was immaculate, cold in its perfection. Screens glowed softly around him, displaying information most people would never know existed. He had built his empire on control, precision, and distance. People feared him because fear kept them predictable. Ava Miller was none of those things. She hadn't sought him out. She hadn't known who he was. Her honesty had slipped through his defenses without permission. It irritated him, and intrigued him in equal measure. Luca was a man who rarely acted on impulse. Every move he made was calculated, every decision weighed against risk and reward. And yet, since receiving Ava's email, he felt something dangerously close to curiosity turning into concern. He didn't like it. Concern made men careless. Still, when he pulled up her public records, minimal, clean, unremarkable, he felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. She lived modestly, worked hard, carried the kind of quiet pressure that broke people when no one noticed. He recognized it because he had once lived with it himself, long before power replaced vulnerability. That night, Luca sent one final message. "You should be careful," he wrote. "Not because of me. Because the world doesn't reward people like you." Ava read it twice, unsure whether to feel warned or protected. She typed back that she'd been careful her whole life, that it hadn't gotten her very far. The response came almost immediately. "Then maybe it's time someone watched your back," Luca said. Ava's breath caught. She stared at the words, her mind spinning with possibilities she didn't want to name. Before she could reply, another message followed. Short, definitive. "I'm in your city tomorrow." Ava's heart thundered in her chest. She had never asked to meet him. She hadn't even suggested it. Yet the reality settled over her like a weight she couldn't shake. This wasn't just emails anymore. This was real. Somewhere deep inside, fear tangled with a spark of anticipation she refused to acknowledge. One wrong email had already changed everything. Meeting him might change even more. Ava spent the night pacing her apartment, the words "I'm in your city tomorrow" echoing in her mind like a countdown she couldn't stop. She tried to tell herself it didn't mean anything specific. New York was full of people passing through every day. Luca Moretti could be here for business, for reasons that had nothing to do with her. And yet, deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Men like him didn't announce their movements without purpose. By the time dawn broke, she had slept maybe an hour, her thoughts knotted with fear, curiosity, and a strange sense of inevitability. She went to work on autopilot, answering emails and attending meetings without absorbing a single word. Every sound felt sharper, every face unfamiliar, as if her world had shifted slightly off its axis. When her phone buzzed mid-morning, she didn't jump this time. She simply closed her eyes for a second before looking. "Coffee," Luca wrote. "Midtown. Noon." It wasn't a request. Ava stared at the message, her heart racing. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on one simple question: why? The reply came a few minutes later. "Because emails leave too much unsaid," he answered. "And because you deserve to see who you're talking to." At 11:58 a.m., Ava stood outside a quiet cafe tucked between glass office buildings, her coat pulled tight around her despite the mild weather. She felt exposed, like everyone passing by could somehow sense what was about to happen. She checked her reflection in the window, simple dress, minimal makeup, nothing remarkable. Ordinary. She clung to that thought as if it were armor. Then a black sedan rolled to a smooth stop at the curb. The driver stepped out first, scanning the street with practiced efficiency. A moment later, the rear door opened. Luca Moretti was not what Ava expected, and that unsettled her more than if he had been. He didn't look like a man from whispered rumors or ominous headlines. He looked calm, controlled, dressed impeccably, with dark hair touched by gray at the temples and eyes that missed nothing. When he looked at her, it felt like the air itself shifted. Not threatening, measured, intentional. He met her gaze without smiling, then inclined his head slightly, a gesture that felt almost respectful. "Ava," he said, his voice low and even, exactly as she had imagined it from his words. Hearing her name from his lips sent a shiver through her. Inside the cafe, the world continued as normal. People laughed, typed on laptops, ordered lunch. The contrast made Ava dizzy. This was the man people feared, sitting across from her at a small round table like any other customer. Luca ordered for himself without looking at the menu, then waited until they were alone before speaking again. You're nervous, he said, not accusing, just observing. Ava let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Wouldn't you be? She replied. For the first time, a faint smile touched his mouth. Probably, he admitted. But you still came. They talked, really talked, for over an hour. Luca didn't dominate the conversation the way Ava expected. He listened more than he spoke, asking questions that went deeper than surface-level politeness. He asked about her childhood, her ambitions, the moments that made her doubt herself. Ava found herself answering honestly, as if some unspoken agreement existed between them. In return, Luca shared fragments of his own past. He spoke of growing up surrounded by expectations he never chose, of learning early that power was the only reliable shield. He didn't glorify his life. If anything, he spoke of it with a detached realism that surprised her. When they stood to leave, Ava felt a strange sense of loss, as if she were waking from a dream she wasn't ready to end. Outside, Luca paused, his gaze steady. I won't pretend this is normal, he said. Or safe. Ava nodded, appreciating the honesty. Then why are we doing it? She asked. Luca considered her for a moment before answering. Because some connections don't ask permission, he said. They happen. He handed her a card, no title, no company name, just a number. If you ever feel like that email wasn't the only mistake you made, he added quietly, call me. That evening, Ava returned home with a mind full of unanswered questions. She replayed every word, every glance, searching for hidden meanings. Luca hadn't threatened her. He hadn't pressured her. If anything, he had given her space. And yet, his presence lingered, heavier than anything she had known before. Across the city, Luca sat in the back of his car, watching the cafe disappear behind them. He knew he was crossing a line he had drawn years ago. Involving civilians, especially someone like Ava, was dangerous. But walking away now felt impossible. As the city lights blurred past the window, Luca made a quiet decision. Ava Miller would not become collateral damage in his world. If she was going to stand this close to him, then he would make sure nothing touched her without his knowledge. Power had taught him many things. Protection, he had learned, was the most dangerous promise of all. After the meeting, Ava tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer fit the way it once had. The city felt different now, sharper at the edges, as if she were seeing it through new eyes. Every unfamiliar face on the subway made her wonder who they really were, what secrets they carried, and whether Luca's world was closer than she realized. She went to work, smiled at coworkers, met deadlines, and answered emails, yet a quiet awareness followed her everywhere. She had stepped near a man whose life was built on power and consequences, and even though he hadn't pulled her into his world, she could feel its gravity. Days passed without a word from Luca. Ava told herself that was a good thing. It meant the meeting had been exactly what he said it was, closure, clarity, an end to a strange chapter that began with a mistake. And yet, the silence unsettled her more than the emails ever had. Late at night, she caught herself checking her phone, half expecting a message that never came. She wondered if she had imagined the intensity between them, if it had meant more to her than it did to him. The thought stung more than she wanted to admit. Across the city, Luca Moretti was dealing with problems he couldn't ignore. A long-standing alliance was fraying, threatened by ambition and impatience. Men who once followed his lead without question were starting to test boundaries, sensing weakness where there was none. Luca handled it the way he always did, quietly, decisively. Meetings were held behind closed doors, words chosen carefully, consequences implied rather than stated. Still, something distracted him. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to a woman with tired eyes and an honesty that disarmed him. He hated the distraction. In his world, divided attention could be fatal. The first sign of trouble came on a rainy Thursday evening. Ava was leaving work late, her umbrella useless against the wind that pushed rain sideways through the streets. As she hurried toward the subway entrance, she noticed a man standing too close, matching her pace without speaking. She told herself she was being paranoid. New York was crowded. People brushed past each other all the time. Still, when she stopped abruptly and pretended to check her phone, the man stopped too. Fear prickled along her spine. Before she could react, another figure stepped between them, a broad-shouldered stranger who met the man's gaze with a look Ava couldn't interpret. The man backed away without a word and disappeared into the crowd. Are you okay, miss? The stranger asked calmly. Ava nodded, her heart racing. I think so, she said. He gave her a brief smile. Good. Get home safe. And just like that, he was gone. Ava stood there, rain soaking her coat, a sick realization settling in her chest. This wasn't coincidence. She knew it in her bones. That night, after hours of pacing and second guessing, she pulled out the card Luca had given her. Her hands shook as she dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. Ava, he said, as if he'd been waiting. The sound of his voice steadied her just enough to speak. She told him what happened, leaving out nothing. Luca listened in silence, the kind that felt heavy with calculation. When she finished, there was a pause. Then he spoke, his tone controlled but unmistakably hard. You weren't imagining it, he said. And I'm sorry. Ava closed her eyes. I didn't ask for protection, she whispered. I know, Luca replied. That's why this concerns me. They met again that night, not in a cafe this time, but in a private space far removed from ordinary life. Luca's penthouse overlooked the city like a fortress of glass and steel. Ava felt small stepping into it, aware of how far removed this world was from her own. Luca didn't waste time. He explained that someone in his circle had noticed her, had seen her proximity to him as leverage. Not a direct threat, yet, but a signal. Ava's stomach twisted. So what now? She asked. Luca met her gaze. Now you decide, he said. You can walk away. I'll make sure you're safe, unseen, untouched by this. Or you can stay close, knowing what that means. Ava thought of the man in the rain, the silent exchange she didn't understand. She thought of her quiet life, the invisible struggles no one noticed. Walking away sounded simple, safe. But something in her resisted it. If I walk away, she asked, will I always be looking over my shoulder? Luca didn't lie. For a while, he said. If you stay, I can control the risk. The word control echoed in her mind. It was frightening, and comforting. Luca moved closer, stopping just short of invading her space. I won't cage you, he said quietly. I won't own you. But if you stand near me, people will know you're under my protection. Ava searched his face for manipulation and found none. Just honesty, stripped of softness. She realized then that Luca Moretti didn't offer protection lightly. It came with a cost, one paid in loyalty and trust. After a long moment, she nodded. I don't want to be a weakness, she said. I want to understand. Luca exhaled slowly. Understanding is dangerous, he replied. But I'll teach you. That night marked a turning point. Ava returned home with a new awareness, one that settled deep in her chest. She was no longer just an observer standing at the edge of Luca's world. She was close enough now to feel its heat, and its shadows. And Luca, watching the city from his window, knew the line he had crossed couldn't be erased. Protecting Ava was no longer a precaution. It was a promise. And promises, in his world, were paid for in blood or loyalty, sometimes both. Ava's life changed in subtle ways first, the kind that were easy to explain away if she didn't think too hard about them. Her commute felt smoother. Strangers who once lingered too close now kept their distance. The uneasy feeling of being watched faded, replaced by a quiet sense of order she hadn't known before. Luca never announced what he did or who he spoke to on her behalf, but Ava understood enough now to recognize the signs. Protection didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it came in the form of problems that simply stopped happening. They began seeing each other more often, always on Luca's terms but never without her consent. Sometimes it was dinner in discreet restaurants where privacy was guaranteed. Other times it was late-night conversations in his penthouse, the city glowing beneath them like a living map of consequences and power. Luca never rushed her, never crossed boundaries without invitation. That restraint surprised her more than any display of dominance could have. He explained his world carefully, choosing his words the way a teacher chose lessons for a student who didn't yet understand the cost of ignorance. There are rules, he told her one evening as they stood by the window, watching traffic crawl far below. Not laws. Rules. Ava nodded, listening. He spoke about loyalty, about silence, about how respect could be demanded or earned, but only one of those lasted. He never glorified violence. When he mentioned it, it was with a cold honesty that made Ava's stomach tighten. Violence wasn't a thrill. It was a failure of negotiation, a debt unpaid until there was no other currency left. Ava asked questions, careful but curious. She wanted to understand the boundaries of the world she was brushing against. Luca answered most of them, though some he deflected with a look that told her the answer carried a price she wasn't ready to pay. What surprised her was how often he asked questions in return. He wanted to know how she felt, not just what she thought. He listened when she spoke about her fears, of losing herself, of becoming dependent, of being defined by his shadow instead of her own choices. You don't disappear next to me, Luca said once, his voice steady. You become more visible. That's the risk. Ava understood then that being protected by him didn't mean being hidden. It meant being marked. She would never be anonymous again, not in the ways that mattered. The thought terrified her. It also stirred something else, an unfamiliar sense of being seen. The first real test came sooner than she expected. Ava received an invitation to a work event, a networking dinner meant to impress investors. Normally, it would have been a straightforward obligation. This time, Luca frowned when she mentioned it. Not in disapproval, but in calculation. He asked who would be there, what kind of environment it would be, who was sponsoring it. Ava realized then how much information Luca processed instinctively, how every situation was evaluated for risk. She bristled slightly. I don't want to stop living my life, she said. Luca met her gaze. I don't want that either, he replied. I just want you alive to live it. They compromised. Ava would go. Luca would not attend. But she wouldn't be alone. The arrangement was discreet, faces she didn't recognize, distance she wouldn't notice unless she knew to look. The dinner passed without incident, yet Ava felt the weight of it the entire time. She noticed how differently people treated her, how confidence replaced the uncertainty she once carried. It wasn't Luca's protection alone. It was the knowledge that someone powerful believed she was worth protecting. That night, she confronted him. Am I changing? She asked quietly. Luca considered her for a long moment. Yes, he said. So am I. The admission surprised her. Luca Moretti didn't strike her as a man who changed for anyone. Yet there it was, an acknowledgement that she had altered his carefully ordered world. Is that a mistake? She asked. Luca's expression softened, just slightly. Some mistakes are worth repeating, he said. The deeper Ava stepped into his orbit, the more she saw the cost Luca carried. He slept lightly. He trusted sparingly. Even in moments of calm, there was an edge to him, a readiness that never fully relaxed. Ava began to understand that power came with constant vigilance. There were no days off from being who he was. She saw the toll it took in the quiet moments, when the city was asleep and his guard dropped just enough to reveal exhaustion beneath the control. Their connection shifted then, deepening into something neither of them named out loud. It wasn't reckless passion. It was deliberate, built on shared understanding and unspoken agreements. Luca never promised her safety without cost. Ava never promised loyalty without choice. That balance, fragile and rare, held them together more tightly than any dramatic declaration could have. But Luca's world did not allow peace for long. Rumors reached him of dissatisfaction growing within his ranks. Someone was testing limits again, pushing too far, too fast. Ava sensed the tension before he spoke of it. She recognized it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his attention fractured. One night, she asked him directly if she was in danger. Luca didn't hesitate. Not yet, he said. But you're the reason someone might try. The honesty hit her harder than fear ever could. Ava realized then that standing beside Luca meant becoming a symbol, of leverage, of weakness, or of strength, depending on who was looking. She could no longer pretend she was untouched by his world. She was part of it now, whether she liked it or not. And as Luca prepared to confront the growing threat within his empire, one thing became painfully clear to both of them: the next move wouldn't just test his power. It would test how far Ava was willing to stand beside him when the cost became real. The shift in Luca's world was subtle at first, the kind of change only someone deeply attuned to danger would notice. Meetings grew shorter. Conversations ended more abruptly. Men who once spoke freely chose their words with extra care. Ava sensed it in the pauses, in the way Luca's attention drifted even while he sat across from her, listening. She had learned enough by now to recognize the signs. Something was moving beneath the surface, and it wasn't moving in their favor. Luca didn't try to shield her from the truth. One evening, as the city lights flickered like distant stars below the penthouse windows, he told her someone close to him was challenging his authority. Not openly. Not yet. It was a test. Small disruptions, delayed responses, quiet disobedience meant to measure how far they could push. Ava listened, her heart heavy. Is it because of me? She asked softly. Luca met her gaze without hesitation. You're part of it, he said. Not the cause. The excuse. The distinction mattered, but not enough to erase the weight of responsibility she felt settle in her chest. Ava struggled with that weight in silence. She had never wanted to be someone's weakness. All her life, she had fought to stand on her own, to be overlooked rather than exposed. Now she was visible in a way that made her uncomfortable. Luca sensed it. He reminded her she still had a choice, that walking away was possible even now. Ava believed him, and that belief was what kept her there. If he had tried to cage her, she would have left. Instead, he gave her truth and space, and somehow that bound her closer. The situation escalated faster than either of them expected. Luca received word of a meeting arranged without his approval, a gathering of men who should have known better. It was a declaration, quiet but unmistakable. Ava watched Luca absorb the information with controlled calm, his expression unreadable. She realized then that the most dangerous moments weren't the loud ones. They were the calm before decisions hardened into action. What happens now? She asked. Luca exhaled slowly. Now I remind them why stability exists, he said. Without chaos. He didn't bring Ava to that meeting. He never would have. But he didn't lie about what it meant either. Hours passed while she waited, her thoughts circling worst-case scenarios she tried not to imagine. She stayed in the penthouse, the silence pressing in on her from all sides. For the first time since this began, fear outweighed curiosity. She understood then that loving, or even standing beside, someone like Luca meant accepting uncertainty as a constant companion. When Luca returned, it was late. He looked tired, but composed. No visible injuries. No blood. Just a man who had carried the weight of authority and set it down carefully. Ava didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. The tension in his shoulders told her enough. He poured himself a drink, then paused and poured one for her too. It's handled, he said. Ava nodded, relief and sadness mixing in her chest. She realized something important in that moment. His world demanded sacrifices long before violence ever appeared. It demanded isolation, distrust, and the constant burden of being responsible for outcomes that could ruin lives. In the days that followed, things seemed to settle. The city returned to its familiar rhythm. Luca's attention steadied. Ava tried to believe the worst was over. But the calm felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Luca knew it too. He became more careful, more deliberate. Ava noticed small changes, new routines, subtle security measures she hadn't seen before. She didn't protest. She had learned that questioning everything wasn't strength. Knowing when to trust was. Then came the moment that forced Ava to confront the truth she had been circling since the beginning. She received an anonymous message, no threats, no demands. Just a single sentence, know where you stand. Her hands went cold. She showed Luca immediately. He read it once, then again, his jaw tightening. This is a message, he said quietly. Not to you. To me. Ava felt a flicker of anger cut through her fear. I don't want to be used, she said. Luca met her eyes. You aren't, he replied. But you are seen. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She realized that no matter how careful Luca was, no matter how controlled his world appeared, there would always be someone willing to test him through her. It wasn't fair. It wasn't something she had chosen. And yet, she had chosen him. She stood by the window, watching the city breathe, and made a decision that scared her more than any threat. She would stop being a liability by pretending she wasn't part of his world. She would learn more, not the details that could endanger her, but the truths that would help her stand steady. When she told Luca, he didn't argue. He listened. I won't make you into something you're not, he said. But if you stay, you need to understand the ground you're standing on. Ava nodded. I do, she said. And for the first time, she meant it without hesitation. This wasn't about power or protection anymore. It was about choosing awareness over fear. As dawn broke, Luca realized something he hadn't expected. Ava wasn't hardening. She wasn't becoming ruthless or cold. She was becoming resilient. That resilience, quiet, unyielding, was rarer than any loyalty money could buy. And as the city woke up below them, Luca knew the final test wasn't whether his power could hold. It was whether he could protect Ava without destroying the part of her that made her worth protecting. The message that followed was not dramatic, not violent, and not immediate. That was what made it dangerous. Luca understood this better than anyone. The city had gone quiet around them in that false way it did before storms, and Ava could feel the tension even when no words were spoken. She had learned to read Luca now, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the stillness that replaced motion when he was calculating outcomes. This time, he didn't pace. He didn't make calls. He simply stood by the window, watching New York breathe below him, as if measuring how much of it he was willing to risk. Ava broke the silence. This ends, she said softly. Luca turned to her, surprised, not by her fear, but by her certainty. One way or another, she continued, I don't want to live waiting for the next warning. Luca studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Neither do I, he said. That was when Ava realized something crucial. Luca Moretti was not afraid of losing power. He was afraid of becoming the kind of man who destroyed what he cared about just to keep it. The confrontation came 2 days later, in a place chosen deliberately for what it represented, neutral ground, old alliances, history that couldn't be ignored. Ava wasn't there. Luca made sure of that. This wasn't a world she needed to see firsthand. But she felt it anyway, the shift in the air, the moment when a line was finally drawn and held. The challenge to Luca's authority wasn't answered with force. It was answered with exposure. Quiet truths revealed to the right people. Leverage applied where it mattered most. By the time it was over, no one was harmed, and no one doubted where the power still resided. When Luca returned to Ava, it wasn't with triumph. It was with relief. He looked older somehow, not weaker, but changed. It's done, he said. Ava searched his face, looking for signs of loss she might have caused. At a cost? She asked. Luca nodded. Everything has won, he replied. She stepped closer, resting her head briefly against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. For the first time since this began, she felt the tension release, not disappear, but loosen enough to breathe. In the weeks that followed, life slowly reshaped itself around new boundaries. Luca became more selective, narrowing his world instead of expanding it. He delegated more, trusted fewer people, and stopped attending gatherings that existed only to reinforce fear. Ava returned to her routines, but with a quiet confidence she hadn't known before. She wasn't hidden. She wasn't marked. She was acknowledged, on her own terms. The city felt less like a maze and more like a place she belonged. One evening, as they sat together overlooking the skyline, Ava finally asked the question that had waited patiently between them. If I hadn't sent that email, she said, what would your life look like right now? Luca didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. Bigger, he said. Colder. Louder. Ava smiled faintly. And now? She asked. Luca met her eyes. Smaller, he said. Quieter. Real. Ava understood then that love, in this world, didn't look like movies or grand promises. It looked like restraint. Like choosing not to escalate when escalation was easy. Like protecting without possessing. She hadn't saved Luca, and he hadn't rescued her. They had interrupted each other, at exactly the right moment. That interruption had changed the direction of both their lives. Months later, Ava stood in her apartment, packing boxes. Not running. Choosing. A new job awaited her, one she had earned without Luca's influence, one that valued her voice and her judgment. Luca supported the move without question. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't offer conditions. That, more than anything, told her how deeply he had changed. On her last night in the city, they walked the streets together like ordinary people, unnoticed and unremarkable. Ava realized she no longer needed protection to feel safe. She needed honesty, and choice. At the corner where they would part, Luca stopped. You know you can walk away completely, he said. Ava nodded. I know. She reached for his hand, squeezing it once. And you know I won't, she added. Luca exhaled, something like peace settling into his expression. Then whatever this is, he said, it's because you choose it. Ava smiled. Exactly. The wrong email had been a mistake. Everything after it was not. It was a series of decisions, careful, frightening, deliberate, that led them here. Ava walked away that night not as someone who had wandered into a dangerous man's life, but as someone who had stood beside him without losing herself. And Luca Moretti watched her go, knowing that power had never changed him the way one honest woman had. Some connections were accidents. Others were answers. This one had been both.